Only the lonely. My title for this morning is along the lines of not only the lonely, but we can bring ourselves into very lonely places by decisions we make. And we can get ourselves out of very lonely situations by decisions we make. And we'll see now how Solomon addresses three issues. He addresses the issue of contentment, a teachable spirit, and the need for partnership or fellowship in our lives. And Giannis and I were talking last week, and he said he was rattled the Sunday morning because he had a sermon prepared. And then early on Sunday morning, God spoke to him and started to readjust the sermon. And him and I were having coffee earlier this week, and I said to him, it's been a long time since that happened to me, which I should never have said. So guess what happened this morning? So I had a very restless evening, and then during the evening, God starts to speak and change things, and so I was literally preparing like crazy at my desk until just now. So one of those things. Living in Johannesburg, where I do now, the city of Johannesburg, that's also a little like being lonely. Because we had no water last week. Woke up this morning, we got no electricity. Pick It Up has been on strike for 3 weeks. No one's picked up our garbage for 3 weeks. Those of you who live in Ecclesiastes, give thanks every morning. I've lived in Ecclesiastes my whole life in Joburg nearly, and I moved to the city of Johannesburg 3 months ago. It's chaos that side of the hill. You just have no idea. So just be grateful for where you live. So I read Ecclesiastes 4 from verse 4, but I know for a fact we're not going to cover those three things this morning. I don't think we'll get anywhere past contentment. So let's read. If you have a Bible with you, I'm going to read Ecclesiastes chapter 4 from verse 4. Then I saw that all toil and skill in work come from a man's envy of his neighbor. This also is vanity, a striving after wind. The fool folds his hands and eats his own flesh. Better is a handful of quietness than 2 hands full of toil and striving after wind. Again I saw another vanity under the sun. One person who has no other, either son or brother, yet there's no end to his toil. And his eyes are never satisfied with riches, so he never asks, for whom am I toiling and depriving myself of pleasure? This also is vanity and an unhappy business. 2 are better than 1 because they have a good reward for their toil. But if they fall, one will help up his fellow. But woe to him who is alone when he falls and has not another to lift him up. Again, if 2 lie together, they keep warm, but how can one keep warm alone? And though a man might prevail against one who is alone, 2 will withstand him. A threefold cord is not quickly broken. Better was a poor and wise youth than an old and foolish king who no longer knew how to take advice. For he went from prison to the throne, though in his own kingdom he had been born poor. I saw all the living who move about under the sun, along with that youth who was to stand in the king's place. There was no end of all the people, all of whom he led. Yet those who come later will not rejoice in him. Surely this also is vanity and a striving after wind. In the Bible, you often discover people make comparisons. It's a way of teaching us something. In life, we do comparisons, don't we? The first movie was much better than the sequel. I think this is much better than that. I prefer this to that. We all make comparisons, and Solomon does the same. You'll notice if you read your Bible, when he talks about the harmony of a loving home, he uses Proverbs 15:17. Better is a dinner of herbs where love is than a fattened ox and hatred with it. In other words, rather just eat a couple of vegetables because you can't have any more and have love around your table than a fattened ox, which means a home with much abundance, but everyone's always fighting. And everyone's full of hatred and there's envy in the home, etc. These comparisons. And so what he does is he wants to give us practical wisdom for how to negotiate this life, how to engage life, and how to live well. And he wants to draw these various comparisons. And so he's going to start straight away with the subject of contentment. He wants to bring our attention to important things. And the first one is contentment. Ecclesiastes 4. Then I saw that all toil and skill in work comes from a man's envy of his neighbor. This is vanity. It's a striving after wind. Now, he already told us in chapter 2, verse 24, that work's actually a gift from God. You need to work. You need to enjoy your work. You're gifted to work. But what happens when work isn't the issue, when the state of your heart is the issue? What happens then? Because work can be distorted by sin. Much of our work, much of our effort, much of our toil for various things, the Bible is pointing out, is actually motivated by something in our hearts called envy. Desiring what others have. Thinking that the way to get ahead, the way to build a name or a reputation for yourself is, comparatively speaking, to do better than somebody else. As if that gives you a sort of a stature. Economists sometimes say that the competitive urge of self-interest is the engine that drives a capitalist economy. Whenever Christmas comes, or even Easter, or events where you're going to have to put your hand in your pocket, you're always being told by social media what you don't have. And you didn't know that you need that till you turn the TV on. Isn't it? Or you walk into a shopping center innocently to buy bread and milk, and you walk past a shop and your eye catches, and you look and there's a 60% off. Now you understand, if you walk in there, you're saving money. So I'm going to borrow from next month because it's actually wise economy. Because I need that 60% off, but I came in for bread and for milk. But I'm going to save. Now envy isn't the only thing going on in terms of work, but what he's trying to show us is that inherently in the heart of man that needs to be dealt with is a selfish spirit. There is something inside that causes us to want to be seen. Have you seen the selfie craze? All over social media. I must post pictures of me. And now you buy sticks. Have you seen them? Because I don't want you to get this part of me in. It's this craze we live in today. I crave that you're looking at me. There's something going on in here. And what you're going to discover over the next few minutes is that the heart of such a person just isn't content. Just isn't content. So if you look up in the English dictionary, and I use the Oxford Dictionary of English, the word content means to be in a state of peaceful happiness. Willing to accept things as they are, i.e. coming third place in a race. To accept as adequate what you have despite wanting more or better. A state of satisfaction. And contentment simply means the state of satisfaction or the state of happiness. So how do you get there? Because he wants to help us deal with stuff that's actually going on in our hearts. There are many things that we want to envy. One of the reasons we work so hard is because we want what our neighbor wants. We look at someone's abilities, situation in life. Sometimes they have the job or the results we wish we had. They had the girlfriend or the boyfriend, the home, the promotion, etc., etc. It's interesting that if most things that we are tempted to envy or we are tempted to desire are things, physical things that our neighbor has that can be bought with money. The 10th commandment, for instance, talks about coveting things that actually money can buy. Your neighbor's house, your neighbor's donkey, your neighbor's ox, etc., etc. We work hard to get more money to buy more things. If we can't, we practice some retail therapy with a bit of plastic. But we have to satisfy this drive that we don't know we have. And the problem is, even if you're a person who has this drive, you create the drive in someone else who also was happy till he saw your life. Now he also wants something more. So we are always promoting this sense. Wanting what God has given to someone else instead of what God has given to you is called a waste or a toiling or a catching the wind. It is a vanity, Solomon says. What it does is it creates within the spirit a restlessness. I don't know how to be satisfied with what I have. It creates within us a spirit of comparison. Where you love your life, then you meet certain people, then you hate your life. Right? That's why sometimes it's always to have a dork as a friend. Because when you hate your life, you spend time with them, then you love your life. I'm joking. Don't go and say, I am selecting you into my family circle because you make me feel better about me. Okay, don't do that. It also helps create within people a sense of drivenness. So now you get this person who is constantly wanting more out of a sense of envy, but being the clever man he is, Solomon sees that there is a contrary to that runs at the exact same time, that has the same thing in its roots. And he says in verse 5, the fool folds his hands and eats his own flesh. So in other words, you get the guy who envies because he works so hard at life. You get the exact opposite. He also envies, but because he knows that he'll never get ahead, he just gives up, folds his hands and says, I can't. But the reason he says he can't is because he's envying what someone else has and knows he'll never reach it. So he just gives up, and that beautiful Afrikaans word, he just becomes sleg. Just gives up. Says, I just can't. I can't do this. So rather than joining the rat race, they drop out altogether. This is deeply self-destructive. It's like Solomon says, the guy who eats his own flesh. What he's saying is he literally consumes everything he has until he has no more because he's not creating something for himself. It's the picture of complacency. It's self-destruction because it's deeply damaging when a person envies what others has, realizes they're never going to get there, so they just give up, they fold their hands, they develop a bad attitude. What happens is your laziness corrodes your self-control. Your grasp of reality, your capacity to actually care for someone else. Your self-respect goes. And you find it in daily life, in marriage, in family life, the workplace ethic, physical care. I want to say to you that if you want to engage this thing called life, that which you've been given, you literally have to give it everything you've got. You should not marry if you're not prepared to give your spouse everything you've got. You don't get married because you're lonely and you need someone else to come and make up for your loneliness. Because the problem is that person has issues of their own. And when you marry, you really should marry somebody else who's fairly complete. You shouldn't go and say, oh, well, that person needs me. Brother, they will keep on needing you. Day and night until you are worn out like an old dish rag. We need to be careful who we marry. We need to be careful. Oh, I want children. I'm so keen for children. That child will cost you every inch of your energy from that day on. And someone told me that babies, they get bigger and you say, I can't wait till they, are teenagers. Then those with teenagers say, it's like hell comes to earth. Then they leave home. Then they go to university. Then they cost more. The bottom line is, whatever you give yourself to, you're going to continually give yourself to it. So there's no time to fold your hands. There's also no time to envy what others have. Which one for you is the bigger temptation? Are you tempted to envy what other people have, so you work hard to get what they have because you want recognition? Or are you someone who just says, I'm never going to get ahead, so I'd rather just give up? In either case, the answer is given in verse 6 of chapter 4. Where Solomon says, better is a handful of quietness than 2 handsful of toil and striving after wind. A good synonym for quietness is contentment. I'm going to talk about that a little bit. You see, the contented person is peaceful and composed. On the inside, his or her inner life, the little inner world, is well ordered. The garden makes sense as you walk with God on the inside of your life. Rather than striving for more, rather than being envious, you're actually satisfied already with what you have. You don't need stuff. And the contrast is reinforced by the difference between having a single handful or a double handful. Because the person with 2 hands full is just a 2-fisted consumer. If I had 3 hands or I was an 8-handed octopus, I'd want my 8 hands full. Because there's a hole in me that nothing can fill. And because of that, no matter how hard I work, no matter how much recognition I receive, no matter how much people tell me they love me, it's never going to be enough. It satisfies for the moment, but tomorrow everything starts again. But the person with contentment realizes this: less is sometimes more. I have learned to live with less. I work hard enough to have a decent, handful in life, it's enough for me. That person has learned to accept what God has given. Have you and I learned to be content? And this is where I'm going to spend the next few minutes. I had two more points, which I'm not even going to get to. But I want to say to you, it's Palm Sunday. You know that, eh? So if you were in a traditional church like the one I grew up in, you'll have little palm fronds made in a cross and little palm things, and you don't even know what the whole thing's about, but it's good. It's Palm Sunday. Jesus was fulfilling a prophecy whereby he went on a colt and he rode into Jerusalem, and the people, Hosanna, Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. The prophecies were that the Messiah would come that way. The problem, of course, is everyone was so distracted by what they wanted from the Messiah that they missed his mission. They missed his whole purpose. He came to die on a cross. They wanted him to deliver them from Rome. And when you're a distracted person, you don't see what God wants for your life. You are just full of demands about what you want for your life and what you think he should be doing for your life. And you spend your life and your quiet times and even your fasting to get what perhaps sometimes God never wanted to give you. The content person is like Jesus. That week leading up to his death and his resurrection, you look at Jesus, he didn't fold his hands in idleness. He didn't envy people who had more possessions than he did, which included almost everyone. He simply worked hard at the calling his Father in heaven had given him. He was committed to this. Father, what you put in my one hand, because my other hand's always looking towards you, what you put in this hand, I'm satisfied with, and I will be satisfied with. The calling to seek and save the lost. As Jesus went about his daily work, he trusted his Father in heaven just to provide for his needs every single day. He gave his time to the raising up of his disciples, to preaching the gospel, to doing the will of his Father. Jesus was very peaceful on the inside. He lived from an inner world where he said, I only do and say what I see my Father in heaven doing and saying. You and I live in the 21st century world in Johannesburg where we are constantly called upon to go beyond the realm of what our Father in heaven has given us. And we are more tired, needing more holidays. There are more people medicated today than ever before in the history of the world. We are running all over the place like headless chickens, not knowing where we're going because we haven't learned the secret of contentedness. Jesus says, work hard, but be content with what you have. You need to find, you and me, our contentment in the goodness of God, in the presence of God around us, in the knowledge of his awareness, of the knowledge that I am deeply loved and I'm covered and I'm enveloped by him. If that is not a reality, because I was created for it, I will go outside of that space and I will spend my life trying to find it. And once in a blue moon, you'll go to a party or an event or a function where it's all about you, and you will be so happy in that moment. The cherry's on the cake, and you are so satisfied. You go to bed, you sleep the sleep of the not quite righteous, but of the self-fulfilled. Your corners are turned up on the edges of your lips, and you sleep so beautifully, and then you wake up. And everything's back to as it was. You are very different to the little girl who quoted Psalm 23. Whose mother said, repeat after me, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And the little girl said, the Lord is my shepherd, that's all I want. She was as accurate as her mother was. Because when the Lord is my shepherd, it's all I want. Because he will lead me beside green pastures and still waters. He will protect me from enemies. He will look after me. He will love me. If I break a leg and I fall, he'll carry me. He'll look after me. There is a place of contentedness in this world that can only be found from being in the presence of the Lord. How would you, if you're listening to me this morning, say, I wonder which one I am. Am I contented or discontented? Can I give you a couple of characteristics of both? A person who is fairly discontented is gratified by a sense of accomplishment. When you accomplish, when you do well, when others then esteem you and they compliment you, you're like a little peacock. Out go your feathers. You are preoccupied by the symbols of accomplishment. The nice car, the nice house, the good friends, the nice clothes, the acclamation of other people. Number 3, you are caught up in that spirit of more. Rich people are often what we call expansionists, because when they get more money, they get a bigger car immediately, or a bigger house, or move to a better area, or do this, or do that. It's never enough. As their standard of living, as their standard of their money increases, their standard of living increases with it. Often, the wealthiest person you see driving in the biggest car has as much at the end of the month left as the poor person does, because they are absolutely bonded to the hilt because of this desire for more. Everything, when they have, everything goes up because it's not, they don't understand. It's about simply being in the place where I can fulfill what God's called me to. It's, I must eat everything I've been given. They have limited integrity. They're not honest about who they are, about what's going on inside them. I would love to deal with this on my third subject I'll try and deal with tonight, which is the subject of partnership, of learning how to live in genuine relationships with real people who care for you. That God has called us to live in relationships with each other. It's very unhelpful where the only person who can speak into your life is your spouse who gave up years ago because you never change. And what you say, no, she does speak into my life. No, she grouses because you're not nice. You see? We need those friends who are real and honest enough. But if you have limited integrity, you can't open the wall just a little bit to let people in and be honest about how you are. You're the person who always says, no, I'm great. Tragically, a friend from long ago who was in the same church as me years ago was Raymer's youth pastor up till 2 years ago. And I see on Facebook he ended his life 3 days ago now. Had got divorced, was busy restoring his relationship with his ex-wife. Business was flourishing. Honestly, him and his ex-wife were in brilliant space, reconciling. Everything was going right. And everything ended 2 days ago. You don't know what's happening behind closed doors. And people are too quick to give the fake smile, but they're not content. And if you have limited integrity, I'm not talking about someone who just lies all the time. I'm talking about someone who's not honest about who they are. And sometimes also, just by moaning about everything that's wrong with you is also not being honest about what you are. That's just looking for sympathy. They aren't interested in honing their people skills. People who aren't content speak badly. They're aggressive. People are objects rather than other people. Everyone must be nice to me, but I can just be as I want to everybody. They're highly competitive. They have this resident explosive anger just below the surface because they're never satisfied. They can blow their top just like this. But they try their best with a beautiful smile to hide it all. Abnormally busy. They don't play often. And the big giveaway, if you look at someone who was not content, King Saul, they don't know how to engage spiritual worship. These people do not know how to worship the Lord because worship involves giving over. Worship involves surrender. And they don't know how. By contrast, look at somebody who would be a contented person. They understand at every level the principle of stewardship. A steward is one who knows that everything I have, I don't actually have. I'm looking after it for him. Therefore, I never need or want or desire what that person's got because maybe God didn't give it to me. But what I will do is with what God has given me, my marriage, my children, my relationships, whatever, what God has given me, I'm going to look after them well for him. I'm going to be the one who brings the balm of Gilead, the peace of God, into various situations. I understand the principle of stewardship. Next characteristic of a contented person is they know exactly who they are. Therefore, they know exactly who they aren't. So they don't pretend to be other people. They learn to settle into the gifts and the abilities and the callings and even the limitations that God's given them. They're not chameleons always trying to fit into another environment that everybody can think you're like them. They don't want to work that hard. They want to be a people who are very content that they are the workmanship of God. They can look in a mirror and say, thank you, Lord, for what you're doing in me. They are committed to a deeper sense of purpose. Their sense of identity does not come out of achievement or accomplishment, but their sense of identity comes out of the deep call of God in their lives to love and serve Him. And you can look no further than John the Baptist in this, where some came to him and said, at the pinnacle of his ministry, others are going to Jesus. Your disciples are leaving you. Buddy, your ministry's starting to drop. And he says, well, I must decrease, He must increase. The reason I came was to put the attention onto the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. That's why I came. John the Baptist was one who was able to rejoice that his ministry was shrinking. Because in the desert, in the wilderness, where God had spoken to him, he knew his deeper purpose was to lift Jesus up, not himself. And some of us as Christians, when you reach an office in the church, you think it's a pinnacle. Meanwhile, sometimes it's simply a temporary thing till God moves you on. That He is registered as being the one. I remember some years ago, I had a chat with somebody who was in a very bad space in their own lives, and I didn't know they were. And we were talking about my leadership of this church, and I made the comment, and I said, the day God tells me to hand over this church, I will miss. Okay, if He tells me to leave, if He tells me to stay in the church, then it's fine. But if He tells me to leave, I will miss the relationships. But I'll have to focus on what He's called me to do now if I was to leave. So the guy says, but won't you miss leading the church? I said, are you joking? He said, but your whole identity is wrapped up in the church. The church started in your home. You and Hensia were the first people. Everything has come through because of you. Surely so much of you is entrenched in this. It would be most difficult. I said, dude, God builds His house. It's the work of hundreds of people that brings a new day to what it is. My identity, bro, is as a son of a father. I'm a child of God before I'm anything else. Then I'm a husband and a father myself. That's my identity. This is the ministry responsibility He's given me. My life isn't wrapped up in how New Day's doing. My life's wrapped up in how I'm doing with Him. And the guy said, no ways. That man landed up having a bit of a self-destruct and went for a long, long time to a Christian psychologist, getting himself sorted out in a space. And about 3 years later, he got back to me and said, I now know what you mean. You cannot be identified by the things around you. John was stoked when Jesus was elevated. It means his ministry wasn't needed anymore. Are you in the place where there's a deeper sense of purpose to your life? Next one, a person who's content has an unswerving commitment to what's really important. They keep their eyes on the right ball. I know for me, when this phone, every day, I never know. I stopped about 3 years ago keeping my phone on. It's the bane of my wife's life. Because I never get hold of you. I said, that's good, but nor does anyone else. I really started to develop something where I freaked out when this phone kept ringing all day and all night. Because you understand, when someone phones you, they don't stop and think, oh, I wonder what that person's doing right now. I wonder if they're in a meeting. I wonder what they're going through. They phone and vomit. And all you have to do is just be available for that. You're the bucket. You understand? And you think, and they, you must understand, friends, when you're involved in a conversation with someone and someone else calls, they didn't make the appointment. The person in front of you did. Learn that this is not a God to be answered immediately. The point is, this thing stopped ringing a long time ago. It's been on silent for 3 or 4 years. I don't think my phone has a loud volume. And I'm okay with it. Because when that thing does ring, I never know what's on the other side. So what's got to be important to you and to I? What do you do in the morning before you engage other human beings? Because the person who's content has an unswerving commitment to what's important. Have you engaged your Father in heaven? Have you spent time with Him in His Word, allowing Him to minister to you, reorienting yourself, like Jesus who got up every morning early to pray. David, early in the morning shall I rise up and seek Thee. If you determine your waking up time, it doesn't matter what time you go to bed. I long ago determined, I sometimes can't control what time I go to sleep, but I can determine my baseline is I get up every morning the same time, and then my routine is the same, in that I follow the Lord. And this morning I had to follow Him without coffee, which is harder than following Him with coffee, you understand? And I still haven't had a coffee, but I had to. You get up, you spend your time with God. So what I do is I have two sort of non-negotiables in a day. My time with God and my time in the gym, because that's how I detox. And if I've got a 24-hour day, I can do those 2 hours, and I'll give the other 22 to whatever I need to give it to. But I'm asking you the question, as a contented person, have you given yourself to what you know is important for your life? If not, someone else will take it from you. A contented person knows how to sit back and say, I have determined my values. I am not if I'm a working man, from 8 to 5, whatever it is, for those 8 or 9 hours, you can have your pound of flesh, but thereafter, no. But you don't understand. If you don't give more, you can't climb the corporate ladder. Who asked you to climb it? Who? You to serve and answer your Father in heaven. You not to serve and answer a boss who works like a pharaoh and drills and demands more because he has no life outside of an identity in the workplace. You're paid to do a job, then do it with all your heart in the hours you're allowed to do it in. And then give yourself to what your Father in heaven has called you to. It's Jesus saying on the coin, whose face is on it? Then give to Caesar what Caesar's and give to my Father what belongs to my Father. Stop giving Caesar what belongs to my Father. Content. A friend of mine who now leads a church today was working, and his boss demanded more, and he came to me, he's crying one day. He said, Greg, what do I do? My boss demands. I said, what are you legally allowed? He said, Dad, go back and tell him. He'll fire me. He can't. You've got a working day. Go and tell him. This friend of mine landed up inheriting the company. The boss who put the demands on him had a heart attack and nearly died, and he got the company, and today's in much better space. There comes a time you realize who you serve. And it comes from a contentedness inside that says, I have a deeper purpose and an unswerving commitment to what's important. The second last one, your life therefore becomes punctuated by peace and joy. By peace and joy. You are not heart attack. What do you call that thing? You're not in that world where you run the risk of being a statistic because God's done something. And lastly, you understand the necessity of the wilderness. You're one who understands that there are times God calls you to the place, the dry, barren places where He can supply your needs, where He can remove distraction from you, where He can help you see far. That's what a desert does. You must have heard some fruitcake, even in this church. I'm going through such a desert time. You know, when a person goes through a desert time, they receive the word of the law from God. They receive the presence of God. Their clothes don't run out, and they get given manna and quail every single day. They are provided for. There's no distractions. And in the wilderness, you can see far because there's no trees or mountains. It's just flat. God increases your vision. He looks after you, and He tells you His words. And sometimes when you're going through a bit of a desert time, it's your Father loving you enough to draw you close and to spend time with you. It's not a bad place. Is that okay? So stop saying, I'm in the desert. No, you're called backslidden. Backslidden is when you haven't spent time with Jesus for a while. Now you're dry and parched because you haven't spent time with Jesus. It's not because God's brought you to a place where He wants to smash you. Understand that.